5 months to go till the August 13th, 2026 election. 45 days till this session of Parliament dissolves, meaning that campaigns would have actively kicked in. A divided opposition with calls for unity. The big question, however, is who has the solution to the country's current challenges, from debt to the high cost of living, youth unemployment. These are the nail-biting issues that citizens seek answers to. Now, with all this happening and so many political parties in the fray, a new contender has thrown themselves into the political ring, and this is the Movement for National Renewal. Shortly right after this break, we will be summoning to Costa's cross-examination the founder of the Movement for National Renewal. Good evening. My name is Costa Mwansa. This is Costa's cross-examination. State Councillor John Sangwa, you're summoned to cross-examination.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The last time I had you on this particular platform, I think we were discussing the civic movement and the idea that you had launched, trying to get to 1 million signatures, or really 1 million people to back this movement by December of 2025. This is March of 2026. The 1 million signatures are now in the bag. You're transitioning from a civic movement to a political party. Give us the status quo now.
Well, we were able to achieve that 1 million. It was basically a test that we set for ourselves. We didn't get it in December 31st, 31st December, as we had earlier on anticipated because of a number of challenges. We extended that period to 28th of February. Again, we didn't reach that target until 3rd March. That's when we clocked the 1 million. Now, with that in place, now we are now in the process of transitioning into a political party, and we are doing everything possible as a political party to try and the challenge currently is, one, first of all, to consolidate the structures at a local level. That would mean ward, district, and provincial levels. And in addition to that is to try and identify credible people that will be able to stand on our ticket as members of parliament as well as candidates for local government election. That is what we are currently working on, and also building the party structures at the various levels.
So this 1 million that you have now, are these merely party members, or is this what forms the party structure?
Well, that was the rationale for that 1 million, is that we came up with ideas. I think last time I was here we talked about a 10-point. Now the idea was to try and see how many people will be able to buy into these 10 points that we came up with. And we set that as a benchmark, as a minimum threshold for us to believe that in fact there are people that support what we stand for. Now, those are people that have come forward to say, we agree with what you are sharing, what you are putting forward. Now, that is the base we would like to build on in terms of identifying the candidates, both for local government and parliamentary election. They have to be drawn from that pool of 1 million people. And secondly, even in terms of party structures, it has to be built from those people. Again, we are mindful of the fact that there are people, for example, who are still on the fence. Some in December decided to walk away because we didn't transition immediately thereafter. So we have left it open, and there were just some who are generally on the fence. Some did not believe that would actually clock that 1 million target. So that too is still open. Registration is still open. Those who still want to join the movement are perfectly at liberty go to our website, register, and then you'll be counted amongst the supporters of the movement. That is how we are managing this process.
The fundraising or the financing of your political activities is something quite very new on the Zambian political landscape. We see it happening in the United States, where you've got funders from the public and so on. This comes obviously in the backdrop that as we've tried to bite in 2016 and in 2021 towards amending the constitution, there's been a push for a political parties bill that should obviously formalize financing of political parties. Let's get into that. Really, how do you emphasize this happening, or are you a proponent then that the political parties bill is what Zambia should be working on?
Yes, it should be. You know, I was explaining to somebody, I saw somebody on X was responding to my video which I posted, and I was advocating that we should fund our own democracy. And this gentleman was able to say that, well, I'm out of touch with the political reality, in the sense that voters are looking forward to a bottle of beer, a chitenge, and possibly for some cash. And then thereafter, they'll be able to give you a vote. Now, I'm a lawyer. I didn't leave practice to come and do the traditional politics. Okay? Now, I took time to understand why is it that after 61 years of independence, we're still struggling? Why is it after 35 years since the return to a multi-party system of government, we have not consolidated our democracy? In fact, there's been regression, and economically we are still struggling. A number of factors have been identified, and one of them is how power is secured. From 1991, basically, elections are bought. All political parties, first of all, they don't disclose the source of their funding. The funding comes from financiers, various business interests, and they don't do it for free. For them, it's an investment. When you win, you expect to pay back that money. And that is why sometimes we wonder about certain policies that government articulate. It can be any government in the last 35 years. You begin to ask yourself and say, how is this policy benefiting the Zambians? Okay, invariably we conclude that it doesn't actually benefit Zambians. It benefits external interest and business interest. Now, we can't continue with that kind of practice. And that is why when the Constitution was amended in 2016, we took away a political party which was initially considered as a mere club. We elevated it and given it a constitutional status. And political parties are expressly provided for under Article 60 of the Constitution. And the Constitution clearly requires that there must be a law that must be passed to regulate the funding of a political party. This is a constitutional obligation.
But just the State Council.
Yes.
I think the argument, apart from regulating, we've seen cases right now in the courts where political parties say they are not mandated to reveal their sources of funding.
Well, that is why the law, I was about to explain, the Constitution makes it mandatory, right? That you must pass legislation so that sources of funding is disclosed, okay, because it creates serious problems. Now, and also there has to be, first of all, it requires that political parties' books are audited. Now, that is a constitutional stipulation. That should have been accompanied by a piece of legislation. We have that piece of legislation, but it's still in the bill form. It was put together in 2017. But neither PF nor this government has been able to implement that.
That's the political parties bill.
That's the political parties bill. That political parties bill would have been a separate legal regime to regulate political parties. And if you read the bill right now, it requires the political parties to be able to disclose the sources of funding, to be able to open their books, to disclose where the money is coming from, how it is being spent. Now, the idea is to prevent political capture. That is what it is intended for, and also to level the playing field. Now, I'm a lawyer. Whether there is that law has been passed or not, it is then the Constitution. And I have a constitutional obligation to give effect to the letter and intent of the Constitution.
So you're promising the Zambian people that if the Movement for National Renewal were to be in government, this bill would be enacted into law and operationalize or implement what is in the Constitution. You, even without this law, are ready to disclose the source of funding to your political party, even whether it's big donors and they put in so much money?
That is correct. In fact, we have announced clearly that, first of all, whoever pays you literally owns you, right? And that is what has happened in the past 35 years. Whoever funds your campaign literally has bought the election for you.
You believe in he who pays the piper plays at you?
Of course, it's reality. That's the reality.
What about those funders that want to remain anonymous?
Well, there is a problem, but you see, there's no such a thing. But you know that somebody gave you money, okay? You can't expect to receive $1 million and pretend that somebody did not give you the money. Now, what we are saying here is that for the democracy to work for Zambians, Zambians must fund it. Okay? If you don't fund it, forget it. The government will never work for you. But when you fund it, if you want the Zambian government to work for you, it must be funded by Zambians. And that is why we are saying, you know what? We have a collective responsibility as a people. Each and every one of us should be able to chip in. We are asking for donation as low as 50. We are giving something like, we are receiving donation as low as 50 kwacha. 50 kwacha. It's not really the quantum, it is the idea that I've actually invested in this.
You believe that once people contribute, they'll have a sense of ownership?
Of course, of course. Because you see, I mean, even for me, I'll give you an example. We have set a limit. Nobody can contribute more than 20,000 in a month. Nobody. Okay? And I, even as a member of the movement, I've also put in my 20,000 kwacha into the account of the movement. Nothing more, nothing less. And that is the stipulation we have provided for. And others have been putting in 10,000 kwacha, 5,000 kwacha, but we have a limit. The reason for the limit is to prevent a single donor to have an overriding influence.
And you'll be publicly declaring these donations?
Yes.
You'll be publicly telling us to say we've raised so much?
In fact, what is going to happen, just like we had a tracker for the people that were registering, there will be a public tracker to be able to disclose how much money has been raised, the number of people that have donated, and what on average the donation is. That will be publicly made available. It is this is very important. One of the challenges that we have had in this country is lack of transparency. Okay? And what we are saying is that the system has to be transparent. Everybody that contributes the money, that money will be publicly accounted for, and how it has been utilized, it will also be disclosed. At the end of the day, people must have a feeling, must know that they succeed, they funded this political party. When you have funded it, you have the right to make claims. Now, the way it is happening now is that a politician comes to a voter, gives him a chitenge, buys a beer, and even some cash. Now, politics has become transactional.
You will not do that?
Never. I'll never do that. I will never give out, buy votes, give out money, or buy people booze. That will never happen.
You will not give your supporters chitenge or regalia, party regalia?
That is different. That is different. But in terms of vote buying, that will never happen for two reasons. First of all, you know, I'm a lawyer. I've taken oath. The moment you start buying votes, what you have done is that you're undermining the constitutional foundation of our democracy. I will never do that because I've taken oath to uphold the Constitution. Secondly, when you start buying people votes, invariably, you know, money is transacted, is cash. Okay, most of the funding that is happening amongst political parties is all cash. And when you are dealing with cash, it has serious implications. For example, that money may have been illegally sourced, and then there are dangers of you being arrested and prosecuted for money laundering. And from a professional point of view, I'm not prepared to take that kind of risk.
Attached to this Article 60, obviously, and the way you've broken it down,
yes.
Sad that we don't have a Political Parties Act yet, but is also the requirement for candidates, even at presidential level, to declare assets before an election. You've heard this argument now that it's an ECZ only requirement, so the periodical update into the registry of the High Court, even for President Hichilema, has not been done, because the argument is he declared right at the point of standing. Will you declare your assets, and will you be transparent? And morally speaking, is this issue about a moral argument or a legal issue?
Two things. First of all, one of the things, I know there's been a lot of arguments on this, but I've argued these things in court. First of all, what you declare is correct. What you declare at TCZ, this is what I have. That declaration must be made public. Okay? It must be made public. Why? Because it enables those people. Remember, when you file your nomination papers, there is a period, I think it should be 7 or 14 days, which gives people the ability to go to court and challenge your nomination. Now, your financial position is one of those things that you be required to disclose. So that if there is money which you owe a particular person, the person will go to the old declaration to say, wait a minute, there's my loan here of $3 million, which is not appearing. Right? Then you can go to court and say, no, this declaration is actually false, because this man actually owes me a lot more than what he has disclosed. And then in the process, what you'll be doing is that there is full disclosure. Now, why do we require full disclosure? Is so that we know the extent of the liability of the presidential candidate. So that when the person is finally president, he's not blackmailed, he's not subjected to possible blackmail when he's in that office. So fighting corruption, and this is necessary. In fact, given chance, would even go further and pass legislation that would require presidents to disclose gifts.
I was about to actually ask that question.
Yes.
You at one point represented late former President Dr. Frederick Chiluba.
That's correct.
And I want to give that context because the ZamTroop account and the issue of gifts is for me one very good case study for Zambia.
That's correct.
In as far as the Ministerial Code of Conduct and what has been put in the cabinet memos and whatever, where ministers are not supposed to get gifts beyond, is it a pen, and they should declare this. But let's take it from that context. President then was receiving gifts, and it was difficult. How do we take these monies to the party? Do we open an account? Which they did. And the rest is history. We know what happened. How do we move ahead with gifts? Because they do come. And shockingly, you hear that my father gave me 50 vehicles. My father gave me 2 lodges at the filling station. Gifts.
You know, this is why I've been arguing. I was privileged to represent President Chiluba during that particular period. I think it was only about 7 years. Now, these are the flaws we saw in the law. Okay, in fact, technically, if you look at it, some have argued that, in fact, the Corrupt Practices Act, in fact, would exempt a president. Now, what we have argued is that, yes, it has to be clearly stated in the law that the president is also bound by that particular piece of legislation. Secondly, you have to go further and state that a president is not supposed to receive gifts. And when you do, you must disclose. Because first of all, when you are receiving those gifts, you are receiving them in your capacity as president. So technically, that should be a gift to the republic, not to you personally. So any kind of gift should be declared to the state. Now, once we pass a law addressing the issue of gift, then we'll have made significant progress in terms of ensuring that there is no abuse of power or authority.
How practically implementable is this?
It is very practical.
Because we've heard of situations where now we're told even just to have an appointment with the head of state, people have is it concierge services?
That's right.
Just to meet
just
the
to facilitate,
president,
yes.
Just to facilitate
yes.
the meeting.
Yeah.
We've heard of phrases like friends of the party or
That's
friends
right.
of the president.
Yeah. No, those are crimes. Those are crime, full stop. And in any case, if you're serious about fighting corruption, those are the things you must be able to address. Okay? So that there's transparency in the law. And anybody that knows, first of all, access to the president should not be a commodity that should be sold. And we have heard, like you have said, we have heard stories that if you want an appointment, you have to pay some facilitation fee, which shouldn't be the case. Now, all these things, we have seen these things happen. Now, we need to provide legislation. Now, you have to start with legislation first and make sure that it is implemented. Now, you have to understand one thing about the law. The law has its own limitations, right? When we draft the law based on our understanding of the challenges in society as it exists, invariably the law tries to catch up with society. Society tends to move very fast. So when a situation is exposed, like we are talking about gifts to do with which are given to the president, what we should do immediately is to be able to respond by providing for legislation to address that particular issue. Now we have people asking for payment in order to access the president. That too must be regulated. There must be a law to address that particular problem. In the absence of the law, you have a problem. Okay, and those are the challenges that we actually are facing right now. So it's quite easy. You know, we must desire as Zambians to do better than we have done. Okay, when the systems collapse, it's not just you and I that will suffer. Everybody suffers. When systems are waking, what you will see is that the benefit will accrue to all of us. So it is imperative to have these pieces of legislation in place. You asked about corruption. Corruption is both a legal and a moral fight. By a moral fight is that when you are privileged to occupy the office of president, you have a moral obligation, even in the absence of legislation, to set the standards. Okay? You don't have to argue, oh, I'm going to do this because the law doesn't prohibit me from doing that. No. Even if the law does not stop you, from a moral point of view, you have an obligation not to do it. You know, so there has to be some element of self-restraint. Now, these are the challenges that we have faced, and these things have been very destructive to our country, and we have to find a solution to them. And the starting point is to acknowledge them and be able to put the necessary legislation to address them.
Back to the drawing board and
yes.
the roadmap ahead, you said you've transitioned from a civic movement into a political party
yes.
now. Others may be saying that, 5 months to an election, a little bit too late to jump into the ring. The dynamics, again, that the newly amended constitution brings about with mixed proportional representation means that you require more people for local government to field in, more people now at parliament. You're talking 226 elected seats. Will you manage? Are you equal to the task? Some are saying you're too ambitious for 2026, just 5 months before an election.
When we set a target of 1 million, people said that we're too ambitious. We achieved it. So, we have to start believing in ourselves as Zambians. Okay, and I do believe that when people are united and determined, they can achieve anything. Okay, failure to achieve is a choice. I normally give this example, having had the privilege of teaching. I'm sure you've had this situation as well. When you are given an assignment, they tell you to say you have 30 days to do the assignment and submit. When do we start writing that assignment?
The day before.
The day before. We have all done those things, right? But even a day before, we still manage to pass. Right? So it is dependent upon how well determined Zambians are in terms of ensuring that we succeed in getting to that finish point. Now, that is the reason we're not starting from a completely green field. We already have structures on the ground. We already have a pool of 1 million supporters. So our job is simply to concretize this, rationalize the resources that we have, and be able to identify the necessary candidates to be able to take part in this process.
So you're convinced and you are confident that you will field in 226 candidates for Parliament and all the required candidates at local government level?
That is the goal. That is the goal. But like I said, subject to the issue of funding. Okay? It is all subject to the issue of funding. Because like I've said, I am not about to go out with a begging board to some business business houses or whatever to say, give me money. No, that I'll never do. But I do believe that once Zambians, if Zambians believe, I do believe, they do believe in the movement, once the issue of funding is addressed, we should be able to do that. Ultimately, it will be a decision of the people themselves.
The same Article 60 of the Constitution that you referred to earlier requires that political parties operate with intra-party democracy, and that they should be able to hold periodic elections or conventions, as it were. We hear some parties that keep postponing conventions. The current ruling parties being questioned as to why they are already endorsing a candidate before this. What is the situation now? Because you're just transitioning.
That's right.
Do we also have a similar ticket? Is it true that you're the presidential candidate on the ticket with a running mate of Dolika Banda?
Okay, I'll address that. Those are compounded questions. First of all, let me state this. This is an infant political party, right? So it is just emerging. We'll be able to we have put in place measures in our constitution to make sure that we are as democratic as possible. Like you have stated, Article 60 is very clear in terms of the obligation that it imposes on political parties. And these obligations are non-negotiable. Every political party is bound to comply with the provisions of Article 60, and we will comply. In fact, that is one of the reasons why there's been a bit of delays in concluding the formalities, in the sense that we have had to make sure that our constitution conforms with the provisions of Article 60. So it's not just a question of putting together the constitution. You have to ask yourself, does the constitution comply or embody the provisions of Article 60? That is what we have done, and we will be as democratic as possible as the situation also dictates.
So we expect to see a convention of some sort?
There will be a democratic, well, first of all, I don't want to box myself in a certain situation, but what you will see is that whatever we do will be democratic in character, provided two things: we comply with our own constitution and we comply with Article 60. That I can guarantee you.
The word out there is that you're the presidential candidate on this ticket, and Dolika Banda is your running mate.
Okay.
Is that true?
Let me state this. You know, we do focus on the things that are completely unimportant, right? Right now, the focus is on building the political party. That is our focus. First of all, there is no presidential candidate and there is no running mate. These issues are premature. Unfortunately, we have learned quite a lot from other political parties. If you look at most political parties and alliances, they break up because everybody focuses on who's going to be the presidential candidate and who's going to be the running mate. That is not part of our conversation right now. Our conversation is how to build a political party. Now, you must also understand that the choice of a presidential candidate and a running mate cannot be undertaken in a vacuum. I can't be a presidential candidate just because I want. The question is that what the Zambians want? Okay, for us, the main issue, that issue will be resolved in May, when just a couple of days before the nomination, because you have to take into account, you are not the only, we will not be the only people vying for the presidency.
Okay, there'll be other political players. So you need a ticket that you make sure that it is the best ticket that the Zambians can accept. Now, there are various factors that you have to take into account. So to answer your question, we haven't decided on who the presidential candidate is going to be and who the running mate is going to be. Right now, we are all members of the movement, we're all members of the party, trying to build the party. That is what our main focus is.
May is just 2 months away from now.
That's right.
Will you be vying for the position to run on the MNR ticket yourself?
I've just answered. Here's the point. First of all, the way we have operated, we have left it open. Now, we will make that decision at the right time. Because remember, the door is still wide open for other people to come in. There is a chance there may be a better candidate that may come in, who will be able to be perhaps more acceptable to the electorate than possibly myself or my sister Dolika. And what do? The idea is to be able to rally behind this particular candidate. Now, we have to move away from this obsession of one wanting to be president. Such decisions cannot be made in a vacuum. They have to be made in the context. So we have to, at the right time, that decision will be made. Right now, we're all members of the party fighting to build the base of the political party. Those discussions will be had in May.
Our journalistic, investigations or really readings in terms of what the public seems to be giving us feedback right now, at a crunch time, 5 months before an election, you've alluded to it yourself, they view people in the opposition, you people in the opposition, as selfish and greedy, that you cannot come together to form a united opposition. You've heard that school of thought. On the other hand, others are saying, there is no opposition to the UPND, so they're anticipating some sort of apathy. Some people who may not be happy with the UPND's performance would rather stay away because they've got no other option. Another school of thought is that the UPND feel as well that with the divided opposition, you've heard this statement, they have no opposition at all, and they have performed extremely well, so they will have a resounding victory. So my question with that picture painted, what makes you as Movement for National Renewal different?
Well, it's first of all, since the formation of the movement, we don't get involved in, say, attacking, for example, the government in power. I don't think that you'll find any kind of attacks. Our approach is very different. It's to speak directly to the Zambian people. And that is why, for now, our main focus is to be able to say, you know what, would like you to fund this particular campaign. Our appeal is directly to the people. Our other message is that we are saying, you know what, Zambians, all manifestos that have been issued in the last 35 years, they're normally crafted in some boardroom somewhere and then given to you. We have a different approach. We would like to hear from you. We would like to listen, and we would like to sit down with you and find out exactly how we can move the country forward. So our approach in that respect is different, and I'm not one that is going to bash the other existing political parties. Now, we must understand one thing about that kind of the discussions you have just alluded to. This is a democracy, right? Any person, and this is something that we must be able to respect. Democracy is messy. It's not perfect, but it does deliver. What happens is that any person is at liberty to be of service to his country. If somebody believes that he can serve his country as a president and he believes he can marshal enough resources to be able to stand, that person, nothing stops that person from putting himself forward. Whilst you have the right to stand, you don't have the right to receive the votes. Okay? The votes you receive is a matter for the voters to decide whether to give their vote or not. Now, again, we have had these approaches. People have come to us and say, oh, why don't you join other alliances? Now, one of the readings we have had and where we have problems, we have said our primary obligation is the country. For me, the number one issue that prompted me to leave my practice to come and join this political process is the country. For me, the country comes first. And I've said, if there is a political party out there whose leaders believe that they'll be able to put aside their personal interest and we join hands in being of service to this country and put the country first, we'll have no choice. We will have no objection. We'll work together. That is what we have put forward. Because an alliance or whatever arrangement for working together, you must be bound by certain values and principles. You don't just come together for the sake of it. I've heard alliances, you know what, people are saying, you know, we have to come together so that we dislodge UPND. We kick them out of office. I don't believe that should be the objective of an alliance. An alliance should be founded on the premise that let's come together so that we can offer the Zambian people a better option.
With that point made, yes, you're very correct that the purpose, and we've heard this, that we are being formed or we should get together so that we oust the UPND. But is that the solution to the Zambian problem?
No, no.
And so let's get into the messaging. I know you said you want the people at grassroots to participate in crafting the manifesto. The manifesto. But still, State Council, we all know if we start, let's target health, for example, that Zambians want good and proper health care. They want medicines to be affordable in the medicines. They want machines or medical kits or appliances. If I want to do a CT scan, it must be affordable. I want to do a test. There should be lab reagents and all these things. Zambia and probably Africa has just suffered the worst blow now under the Trump administration, the collapse of the USAID and the withdrawal of that funding. We are now being told that such cooperating partners such as the US now are coming with new terms in terms of how they are approaching. They are saying it must be transactional, it must be reciprocal. So again, if you came into office, this is what you will find. How will you handle, or what does the health policy look like for now in your vision as MNR?
You know, I was having a discussion with one of the reporters. I think the person is here in Zambia doing some research on that same particular subject of health. What has disclosed the coming of Trump and the issues you have addressed is how vulnerable we are as a country. Do I blame the American government for the position they have taken? My answer is no, because every government looks out for itself first. America has made a decision to say they will do what is in the best interest of America. Now, we now have a choice, and the threat is real. What we have allowed to happen is that it now poses a serious national security risk, in the sense that we have a choice. If we don't sign, what is going to happen is that people that are dependent on drugs supplied by the American government will go without these drugs. And there is no indication that the government has the capacity to immediately step in and cover that gap that will be left with by the American government. What does that disclose? What it discloses is that there are certain sectors of the country or of the economy of the country's life that should not be left to be funded by donors. And one of the sectors is health. That should be the responsibility of government. Now, yes, you can get donor support, but should just be a short-term gap measure until the government develops capacity to be able to take over that particular, to be responsible for that particular sector. What has happened over the years, this is something that has been going on, I think, for more than 20 years or so. That should never have been allowed in the first place. We should have used the American assistance as a stopgap measure whilst we are creating our own capacity.
President Hichilema, just like what you're saying,
yes,
responded to this pull out, as saying it's a wake-up call for countries like Zambia. One of the things he said last week is that they have responded by increasing budgetary mobilization and allocation to the Ministry of Health. However, State Council, we are party to treaties like the Abuja Declaration, which says 15% of your annual national budget must go to health. We are still under 15 percent. The UPND right now are boasting to say that the availability of basic medicines and health kits is at 80% on average in health centers. But there are still gaps in terms of delivery, procurement, pilfering, which you heard the president when he was appointing the new health minister just last week.
That's right.
Mention about. I don't want to bank it, but let's. I want you to tackle this issue on the funding versus then you're a lawyer. Should we sign this US deal, or how should we approach it? This 5-year deal that they've put on the table. They'll be collecting data of citizens. There's privacy issues. There's also a hidden aspect that we've not been told about, or whether they're asking for mineral as a concession. I know it's bulky, but
it's a tough question. Okay, let me break it down. Let me start with some of the issues that you have raised. One of our biggest problems as a country is that there's been a general institutional collapse. Safeguards in the institutions have collapsed. So it doesn't matter how much money you pump in, controls are non-existent. If you are talking about drugs, for example, the issue that the Americans raised was that the drugs which they were donating were being stolen. Come on, who steals aid that is being given because you are poor? Somebody has seized you, and what do? You end up stealing. Now, that is a problem. So a lot of things in Zambia are a product of failed institutional structures. Now, part of the solution is not about how much money you pump in, because as long as the controls are non-existent, the institutions are weak. It doesn't matter how much money you pump in, that money will be lost. For example, just talking about the health sector, there is a joke that is told. Somebody told me to say, under PF, medicines used to disappear at the clinic level. Now, under the current government, drugs are not even reaching at the clinic level. Now, those are very serious issues. What is required is to strengthen the institutions of government. There must be traceability from procurement up to the patient. That system doesn't exist. So what it means is that once the drug is procured, there must be a digital system that will be able to trace each and every movement of that particular drug until it reaches the patient.
I've personally been to ZAMSA, and again, this was a donor-funded, support project to digitize and obviously do everything. Barcodes. I've been there.
The system doesn't work.
Now, doesn't work. When the Americans flagged this off, whether it was a knee-jerk reaction or not, we've put in private auditors. And this seems to be the methodical way of doing things. Private auditors are auditing the army in procurement. They are auditing ZAMSA now. Is this working to strengthen institutions?
No, it's not. They see the very fact that you are now auditing, it means there is a problem. Okay, so what are we doing? We are responding to a problem. Now, if controls were there, the conversation would have been totally different. So those are the issues that we have to look at. It is, you see, the failure of institutions in Zambia it's not just in one sector. Literally every sector is broken.
So how do you intend, or how do we put control measures then in the health sector? Because this government, you're saying the medicines are not reaching. We are seeing it in the media. They take us, and we show cameras, and these nurses are telling us we have 80% stock.
Oh, okay. Now, here is the point. You see, when I was talking about digital tracking system, they should, at the heart of all this is transparency. Now, technology has advanced so much. Okay? Now, we don't need to depend on the word of somebody. There should be a public portal where if you and I want to verify these stories, we can go there and verify that. Does such a portal exist? Doesn't exist. So what we're doing is that we are relying simply on people. Now, this is public funds. There should be traceability in terms of how government money is being spent. when it is dished out, what does the government get in return from that money that has been paid? And the goods and services, who are actually the people accessing these goods? And are these goods actually reaching the actual beneficiaries? Not whereby you are told by a nurse, you should be able to verify this yourself. But the truth of the matter, based on the limited investigation that I've done, what I've determined is that that is not correct. The system is as good as the people themselves that you put there. Yes, you can have a fancy system that is there. Zambia's problem is not that we don't have these systems. They don't work as they're supposed to work. Those are the challenges that we face, and those are the issues that we should be addressing.
So how do we make them work? The portal will sort out this challenge of accountability?
Well, it goes beyond that. First of all, you have to make sure that you have the right people running these institutions. Okay? So because at the end of the day, institutions are human beings. And that is why, as a movement, we are saying the responsibility to transform Zambia is our collective responsibility. If you are a doctor, there is a chance for you to steal the drugs. Don't. You are a nurse, there's a chance for you to steal the drugs. Don't. Make sure that the drugs are used for the intended purposes.
Isn't this what President Hichilema is preaching? In fact, when he was, appointing the new Minister of Health, he in his own words, he says, we must criminalize theft of drugs because we do not have them.
That is a promise, Mr. Mwansa. That is in government. Okay, I'd like to avoid bashing anybody in government, but what is supposed to happen is that, yes, we know drugs are being stolen. What have we done about it from a regulatory point of view? Nothing. If you are talking about criminalizing, why hasn't that been criminalized in the first place? Because if we wanted, legislation would have been passed in an instant. We saw how Bill 7 was passed in a blink of an eye. Now, why can't we pass similar legislation? Because I'll tell you one thing. Given a chance, I would insist that any kind of crimes that takes away public resources, there should be a very, very heavy penalty. For example, I would even go as far as recommending that if you are caught stealing drugs or stealing government resources, you are basically a saboteur. You are an enemy of the state. The penalty must be very, very stiff, and I would even go as far as recommending that such a person goes to jail for life. That would be a way of deterring these things or these bad activities. It's not just about talking about it. We know the problems. We know the challenges. Now, Zambians need to acknowledge the fact that it is our collective responsibility to turn around this country.
Back to my earlier question.
Yes.
Zambia is between a rock and a hard place.
Yes.
Do we sign this US deal?
Okay. I was asked this question. It is a tough question. Here's the problem.
Well, leaders must make the tough choices.
Right. Yes. I was asked this problem. Here's the problem. You don't sign, people die. Okay? People will die because we don't have capacity to turn around and cover the void that will be created by the withdrawal of American funding. Now, if I was sitting there, I would put this issue as part of the national discussion so that the people decide. That would be my approach to this. First of all, I would be transparent. I would make the agreement which the American government is proposing for us to sign, I'd make it publicly available to the people. Because ultimately, when you are president, you are simply a servant of the people, and you have to allow the people to make that decision. It's not an easy decision. The other option is that you sign, which means you give away the minerals. Now, I cannot give you a definitive answer for a very simple reason. I'm not in government. I don't have access to the actual data that would form the basis of that decision. Because as government, the people in government have better data than we outsiders have. And whatever we're talking about is based on what has been published. And what has been published is not always accurate. But based on the information I have, and if I was to make that decision, I would be plain and ask the Zambian people to decide which way we have to go. But I believe those in government maybe have better solutions, but whichever way it is, it has exposed how vulnerable we are. We were quite complacent in receiving American aid year in, year out, and yet we should have treated donor funding as a temporary measure and not as a permanent solution to our challenges.
Going into this election, the UPND is preaching a message of free education that they promised in 2021. They have delivered. They've extended this towards a school feeding program that was launched by the president only last month. If you were to take over government, would you sustain and improve the free education policy?
Well, first of all, education is not a choice. I'm a product of free education. Okay, I moved from primary school to university, ended up with 2 degrees free without paying anything. So I know the value of education. What we should be talking about now, again, is part of the national conversation. It's not just a question of education being free. What is the quality of that education that we're giving out? Nobody's talking about that. That should be able to form part of the national conversation. But some of the figures I have heard, for example, I went to Chongwe, spoke to certain people there, to some families. They say, what free education are you talking about? In fact, the earlier system was even better. Say, why? They say, well, we now have 180 kids in one class. Now, a kid can even stay away from class maybe for about 2 weeks. The teacher won't even notice that. Okay? So it's not just a question of, free education. We have free education. It shouldn't be a slogan. Can we drill down? What is it that we're talking about?
Shouldn't we be starting from somewhere then and improving on all these? Because
of course.
Sadly, what we hear from you, the politicians, is to say, free education, what are they talking about? They've failed. And yet again, we hear people like yourself and the president saying we're products. I mean, yes, the UPND is not the first. KK put up free education. Is it not a good thing?
I'm not saying that education is a bad thing. I'm not saying that free education is a bad thing. What I'm saying is that we have to acknowledge it, but go further. What is the quality of this?
How do we improve the quality?
Well, first of all, it has to require looking at, first of all, there are many factors that we have to look at. For example, currently, as I was trying to explain to you, you have to involve the parents in this exercise. Okay? Because what you have is a situation whereby you have 180 students in a class. How sustainable is that? That is what should form part of the conversation. The concept is okay, but the question is it being implemented correctly? And what is the outcome of that particular policy? Now, remember, education is not just an end in itself. Education is a means to an end. Okay? Now, that is why we don't stop at the fact that education is free. What is the quality of that education that we are producing? If just going to school was enough, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But the point is that we have to look at what we are producing. How are these kids? What is the quality of the product we are producing? So don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing anyone in saying that free education is bad. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that can we move the conversation beyond free education? Look at the quality of what we are offering. That is the conversation I'm asking for. And just by the way, when you say that, I went to some other township, for example. Parents came and said, well, it's not actually free. Because if you go there, and these are issues that we can't ignore. We have to be realistic and accept them. They said, well, what do you mean? I asked, what do you mean? So, well, if you go there, they'll tell you there's no class. There's no space for your son or for your daughter. But if you produce something, 2,000, a place will appear.
So should we be building more schools and employ more teachers like this government say they've employed over 40,000 teachers from 2021?
That is correct. But the point is this. We now have to drill down. Let's move away from slogans. Let's look at what exactly does this translate into in reality.
Apart from slogans,
yes.
what this government and its president have been very consistent whether people argue with them or not, is that they stick to their decisions. For example, they believe in their own terms that CDF for them is the biggest game changer for Zambia. They've been increasing it practically in the budget from 2021. It started at 1.6 million. It's now coming just sheer of 40 million as a decentralization policy, as an empowerment policy. There are bursaries in there for school-going children. There's, money going for women and cooperatives. Is this something you would come and scrape off if you were in office, the CDF?
No, you don't scrap off. You don't. First of all, I've stated this. It's good to have all these ideas and throw around all these numbers. But what's the real impact on the ground? Who has actually conducted research to be able to tell us what the benefits of CDF are? Okay? Nobody has carried out any research. So we're just dumping money. So we can't celebrate that. What we have to do at the right time is to be able to carry out research and be able to say, we spent so much, and these are the benefits that we have gotten. Okay, it's one thing to say, oh, we're pumping in 40 million. But what is that 40 million? What are we getting out of that 40 million? Okay? Now, you have heard stories, for example, about how CDF funding is being abused. You have heard stories to that effect. Now, also, you have also heard stories where they say, in some constituencies, they will tell you to say, no, we 40 million, but at some point, they've only maybe disbursed 8 million. Okay? There are all these issues to do with the CDF. So what is required is a non-partisan approach to these issues. Just look at the facts. What are the benefits? Now, if something is working and is benefiting the people, you don't scrap it. Your job is now to improve it. How can it be improved? But right now, there are serious challenges that we have with this particular system. Now, another point is this. Again, it comes down to transparency. You can say you have 40 million kwacha that has been directed towards it. Who has received that 40 million? How can we verify that? And what have we gotten out of that 40 million? These are the issues we should be having.
Isn't don't just available within the CDF committees? They sit
where?
In the chambers.
You and I should be able to access that. You and I should be able to access that, to verify that. Okay? I don't need to go and ask somebody to say, give me a report so that I check how a CDF has been funded. No. That information should be readily available.
That's why the auditor's report is there. It shows...
Well, auditor's report comes after how many years?
Well, a year and a half plus.
That's right. But in the meantime, the damage has already been done, right? So what we're talking about is real time for me to be able to say,
services, inflation is now down to single digit, and they boast that it's reduced even before record time than they had anticipated. Their target actually is 6 to 7%. Your exchange rate is now below 20 kwacha, though they anticipate because of the current happening in Israel and Iran, this may have an influence. Reserves, they boast that now is 6 months of import cover, $5.4 billion, they say, like never seen before in Zambia. They are targeting copper production of about 3 million metric tons in the next 10 years by 2031. 10 million metric tons of maize production again. These are the targets they're setting. Would you really have a message no sweeter than that for a government that has all this in the bag?
Those are promises. They are promises.
Inflation is single digit. The exchange rate is
but again, we come back to this. I'm trying to avoid having to engage in that kind of discussion. But the bottom line is this. There are serious structural problems in Zambia that we're talking about. This is the second time in Zambia that we've been handicapped by debt. Okay? So the issue is not so much that we are servicing debt. The conversation should be able to move beyond that to say, how do we make sure that we don't end up in this situation? Nobody's having that kind of discussion. And first of all, we're not even looking at it, first of all, how did we end up in this particular position of debt? How did we end up here? So you can't fix a problem unless you understand the cause. Once you understand the cause, then you take steps to make sure that that particular problem does not occur. Now, those other, that for me would be the most critical factor, because in 91, we had a debt of $7 billion. We went through a very painful period. We cleared, that debt was never repaid. That debt was forgiven. By 2008, 2009, we're literally debt-free. Now, within 10 years, we wrecked another $12, $13 billion. Okay? So, yes, we have no choice, but what we're doing is that we have restructured. We are basically pushing the debt away into the future, but we're not looking at how did we find ourselves in this situation in the first place. Not once, but twice.
Once we realize how we found ourselves there, we still have a debt of $15 billion. Whichever government is in office after August 13 has to pay.
They have to pay, but you see, the conversation has to go beyond that. What safeguards do we make sure that as we are doing this debt servicing, we don't end up in the same position?
Other than the safeguards, shouldn't we be asking solutions to building capacity to pay?
Yes, that is true. That is true. What the very essence. Now, you are bragging about, you are saying, okay, they are boasting. Yes, it's boasting. Here is the reality also. All these things that you've thrown around, all these are just numbers. But here's the reality. The economy is projected to grow. It was initially projected to grow at 6.5%. Now it has been adjusted to 4.5%. Now, where are we going as a country? Okay? That's the reality. Now, what headroom are you talking about? And nobody talks about this very important thing, our population growth. Our population growth is nearly 4%. 4%. Nobody talks about the population growth, which means we are receiving almost 1 million people is being added to the population every year. Now, this should be part of the conversation, tough decisions to be had. How do we sustain this particular population growth? By some account, what is sustainable in Zambia is that we need to have, at a minimum, double-digit economic growth of more than at least 10% and above. We have never had that. So what should form part of the conversation is how do we make sure that we grow the economy to a double-digit growth? That will be the solution to our problems, not what we're talking about. You're talking about 10 million, 3 million of copper. I mean, for me, that's neither here nor there. The critical factor is this. Right now, we are producing 1 million tons, right? Of copper.
Slightly under.
Slightly under. The projection, but
yes, it was 1 million.
Just about 1 million, just slightly under. The point is, how much revenue is the government or the country realizing from that 1 million tons? That should be the conversation before you go to 3 million. Okay, before you go to 3 million, okay, 3 million is in the future, but we're dealing with 1 million right now. What is the benefit to the country from that 1 million?
In conclusion, State Council, they say it's very easy to be an armchair critic, or to criticize a player when you're not in the game.
That's right.
So these numbers that they are attributing to a standard that you use to measure whether it's a GDP, whether the economy is growing, or the per capita income, and so on. So if the Zambians were to vote today and MNR is on the ballot, what kind of government and policies do they envisage? Generally, what do we expect of an MNR administration?
Yeah, first of all, let me address this issue. Yes, it's easy to be an armchair critic, and that is basically what I was in the last 35 years. I went to court, not necessarily armchair. I don't think I'd describe myself as an armchair critic, because I went to court to fight government after government to try and make sure that we hold them accountable to the law. Now, I have moved away from practice and I've joined in the actual political fray, right? Because I'm saying, wait a minute, let me try and transition. If I believe I have good ideas, why then can't I get involved? So I've moved away from being an armchair critic into something practical. That's what I've done. And it's a huge sacrifice for me. And I still believe that I think I need to take this opportunity to urge other professionals that the country, any country, cannot be developed when its best brains and its best minds stay away from the political process. They have to get involved, because when you are not involved, your ideas outside there are simply noise. They'll make a difference when you become part of the political process. That is the message I have to give to my fellow professionals. I've done it. I'm still breathing, and nothing has happened to me. But I do understand the cost is heavy. But we need to sacrifice for our country. No country in the world has ever developed without sacrifices. We have to sacrifice, if not for ourselves, but at least for our children. You asked about the MNR, what we will do. The fundamental point is that, which is what we emphasize on, is that when you look at every sector, and this is where I disagree with most of the people, what we've been talking about, for example, those are symptoms. We're not addressing the real problems. This government and previous government, they all talk about symptoms, including, I don't mean to offend anyone. Somebody sent me a list of things, but this is something, maybe a topic for another discussion. But the point is that we don't address the underlying problems. What we need to do, the starting point in fixing this country is one. First and foremost, restore the constitutional order. Because that's the foundation of who we are. That is why the Constitution is so critical. We need to show respect for the Constitution. That is what we would do as a starting point. Comply with the Constitution. Respect the Constitution. Uphold the Constitution. Secondly, there is need to have rule of law. Mr. Mwans, I'll tell you confidently and perhaps even arrogantly that as long as there is no rule of law in Zambia, nothing is going to happen in this country.
So,
nothing.
In short, your administration will be anchored on the rule of law. That in turn will steer economic development?
Oh, yes. There is no economy that grows in a state of lawlessness. Every economy requires, businesses require predictability. And predictability requires rule of law, respect for the constitutional order. Those are the key foundations of any viable government. In the absence of rule of law, in the absence of respect for the Constitution, you are just dreaming. Nothing is going to happen to this country.
State Councillor John Sangwa, thank you so much. We will interact and obviously track the process in the MNR and the democracy you talk about, and we shall hold you to account as part of the rule of law.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The challenge has been set to professionals and to citizens alike. Participate in the affairs of your country. Yours is so simple. He has put himself up, just like others will do, on the ballot. Ours is to vote, and the polls are coming in just about 5 months' time. That wraps up this week's edition of Costa's Cross-Examination. We're now